A bunch of kids are on a sandy beach, each with an iron rod in hand. They're poking the sand carefully because they're looking for hidden mines. One of the boys manages to open a mine, take out its dangerous part, and make it safe. But another boy isn't so lucky, and the mine blows up. This story is real and took place in Denmark in 1945, right after World War II. The German soldiers had left Denmark after being there for 5 years. After World War II, there were more than 1.5 million mines left along the coast of Denmark. This was a big danger for the people there. To get rid of the mines, Denmark asked 2,000 young German prisoners of war to help. These prisoners were mostly teenagers. They had to use their hands to find these dangerous mines. Danish soldiers started training them by showing them pictures and explaining how the mines worked. The first person went in and carefully opened the mine. They removed the part that could make it explode. The second person was scared, and their hands shook a lot. But they managed to take out the dangerous part of the mine, and everyone felt relieved. The next person who went in couldn't do it, and the mine exploded, causing their death. The others were very scared but still lined up to try and disarm the mines. After undergoing a quick training session, 11 young boys were brought to the western coast of Denmark. They were watched by a Danish sergeant named Karl, who held a deep hatred for Nazism. Karl approached the group and realized that this squad was comprised of young teenagers, some barely in their early teens, including a pair of twins. However, in the eyes of someone who despised Nazism like Karl, they were simply German soldiers and tools for mine clearance. Karl pointed to the distant sandy beach where 45,000 mines were buried. He explained that all they needed to do was to disarm 6 mines every hour, and in 3 months they would be allowed to return home. The boys immediately got to work. They lay on the sand, slowly moving forward, each holding only an iron rod to probe for mines. Ernst, one of the twin brothers, discovered the first mine. Using the knowledge he had gained during their training, he carefully disarmed the fuse. The first day of mine clearing went smoothly without any casualties. They had to put dry grass inside cloth bags as makeshift bedding. Afterward, they discussed their plans for when they returned home, which served as their motivation. Only one person in the group doubted that they would be allowed to return home, thinking that Karl wouldn't release them. However, the rest of the children still believed that Karl would follow through. They weren't provided with food. Ernst noticed a Danish girl playing nearby and approached her to strike up a conversation. She mentioned that her doll was injured. He took out some cotton and bandaged the doll. The girl's mother saw this and hurriedly called her home. Ernst seized the opportunity to take a loaf of bread from the girl and shared it with his brother. Night fell. Karl locked them inside a wooden house, placing wooden beams across the door to prevent them from escaping. The next day, the boys continued their work, but their movements were slower than the previous day due to extreme hunger. By evening, the boys were already in the house. Schumann approached Karl and inquired about when they would receive food. Karl calmly responded that the Germans wouldn't receive priority for food. He didn't care if those boys died from mines or hunger. After speaking, he immediately shooed them back into the wooden house. Due to extreme hunger, Helmut pried a plank off the wall and sneaked outside to search for food. Early the next morning, Ernst started running a fever and feeling nauseous. Despite their condition, Karl didn't allow them to rest even for a moment, forcing them to return to work immediately. The children reluctantly returned to their tasks. Wilhelm also began showing similar symptoms, but he couldn't control his vomiting. Seeing this, Schumann went to check on Wilhelm, and at that moment, after the explosion, both of Wilhelm's arms were severed, and he cried out in pain, expressing his desire to go home. His nearby friends could only stand and watch. Ernst shouted for help, hoping someone would come to their aid. A woman from a nearby farm coldly shut the door. Karl sat inside the house, seemingly unaffected by the cries. It was only when he heard Wilhelm's desperate cries of "Mom, I want to go home," that he couldn't stay still any longer. He went outside and administered a sedative to the boy. Perhaps the call for his mother made Karl see them not just as soldiers, but as children as well. He took the boy to the hospital. At this point, everyone started showing similar symptoms, vomiting collectively. Helmut proactively admitted that due to extreme hunger the night before, he had sneaked to a nearby farm and gathered some grains to feed everyone. Karl asked the woman working on the farm about it. She told him that the grains were contaminated with mouse droppings. After saying this, she smiled contentedly, relishing the fact that the sick ones were Germans. Karl instructed the children to go and fetch seawater and drink continuously until they vomited out the contaminated grains. Then he showered the boys. Karl went to the hospital to visit Wilhelm, but the nurse informed him that the boy had passed away shortly after arriving. Karl began to feel guilty for not allowing the children to eat. In secret, he stole some bread from the military supply brought for the children, all of which was noticed by the lieutenant. Carl left the bread in front of the door and called the children to wake up and left, pretending as if nothing had happened. The hungry children, after days of starvation, finally saw food and devoured it eagerly. Seeing the hopeful eyes of the children, Carl lied, saying that Wilhelm's wounds were healing rapidly and he would soon be able to go home. The children displayed obvious joy. However, due to the loss of one person, each child had to disarm 8 mines within an hour. The children continued their work while chatting happily about their plans once they returned home. These kids didn't complain or blame anyone because they knew they were redeeming mistakes caused by other German soldiers. That evening, a drunken group of soldiers mistreated the children, who cowered in fear and didn't dare fight back. Their comrades rushed to intervene, only to have the soldiers point guns at them. As they were about to shoot, Carl stepped in and told them that killing these children would require using their own people to defuse the bombs. Angered, the soldiers left, with the lieutenant advising Carl not to forget what the Germans had done to their country in the past. Carl mentioned that these children didn't know what had happened or why there were mines here. Schumann detected a double mine, a type specifically designed to target mine clearers. The boy shouted loudly for everyone to be careful, but nobody heard him. Werner was happy after successfully defusing a mine. Unaware of his brother's call, the double mine immediately exploded when Ernst warned him. As the dust cleared, Ernst rushed to the spot crying and calling his brother's name, but his brother had been blown apart. Carl ran to the scene, but there was nothing he could do, repeatedly saying he needed to go back and find his brother. Carl administered another sedative and sat beside the distraught boy to comfort him. Carl realized that the young man in front of him wasn't a member of the Nazi regime, but rather a helpless child yearning to go home, yet tragically lost his brother. Carl approached Schumann and admitted to lying about Wilhelm's fate. Schumann responded that he had known for a while. The boys simply wanted to clear all the "Don't worry, you'll be all right." That night, Carl didn't lock the door anymore, then drove to the military supply to get bread for them. The next day, the children were happy because Carl allowed them to rest. They played soccer on the beach together. As things were turning for the better, an explosion shattered the moment. Carl's pet dog had been killed in the area where the mines were already cleared. Carl thought the children were deceiving him. The Nazi had taken his loved ones and was now taking away his beloved dog. The hatred within Carl resurfaced, and he once again transformed into the resentful, hateful person he used to be towards the Nazis. The guy in charge of the mine clearing area claimed that all the marked mines had been removed, and the count was accurate. Carl disregarded his statement, treating him like a dog, throwing a ball and patting him on the head, praising him as a good dog. Then he ordered the guy to kneel and learn to bark like a dog. Carl had lost faith in them and ordered them to recheck the cleared area for mines. One boy protested, but Carl became furious and repeatedly slapped him. On the sandy beach, the children linked arms and formed a line. They used their own bodies to probe the ground for remaining mines. Dissatisfied with Carl's mistreatment, the boy who had been slapped decided to run away. Schumann still clung to the belief that once they had cleared all the mines, they would be allowed to return home. The next day, the woman from the farm suddenly rushed towards the house. She was in tears, desperately calling for helping her daughter. The boys hurriedly followed her out. It turned out that her daughter had ventured into a minefield to play. Schumann immediately got down and prepared to clear the mines. Carl approached the house and found the door wide open, with only Ernst inside. He thought the others had run away. He went to the beach and saw them courageously working to rescue the girl. Suddenly, Ernst approached the minefield, passing through the protective barrier without hesitation. He went straight to the girl's side, comforting her just as he had done before, attending to her doll and speaking about missing his brother. The girl gently touched his hand as if consoling him. Ernst handed the girl over to Schumann and stood still, even as others called him back. He just smiled and shook his head before proceeding into the minefield. He had left the world to follow his brother. Schumann, the most resilient of them all, couldn't hold back his cries. Carl went to him, trying to offer comfort, assuring him that they were about to go home. Carl sat alone, looking ahead, reflecting on the young lives lost before him, feeling the heaviness of his emotions. After 3 months, they had completed their task and were about to go home. 6 children were loading the last mines onto a truck, happily discussing their plans for the future. Their faces were filled with joy and hope. The massive explosion struck, plunging a corner of the sky into a cloud of black smoke. Carl and his friends rushed to the scene, but all they saw was a heap of ruins. The remaining 4 boys had completed their mission before the deadline. However, on their young faces lacked any signs of joy or happiness. The mother and daughter stood at the farm, watching as the truck departed. But instead of heading home, they were taken to a larger minefield containing 72,000 mines. All the promises of going home were lies. Initially, there was no intention to let these children return safely. Even Carl was deceived. He tried to use threats to force the release of the children. Carl wanted to keep his promise to the kids, but the higher-ups said no. The leader of the mine-clearing team got a letter. 4 kids were called by their names and taken into a vehicle. They didn't know where they were going. Eventually, they saw Carl. He had promised to help the kids get back home, so he brought them closer to the border, giving them a chance to return to their country. Carl decided to give a fake order. Carl purposefully set free the 4 kids who survived the mine-clearing job, allowing them to cross the border and go back to their own country. Some might say, as a soldier, he broke the rules, but as a person, Carl's kind act made the harshness of war less important. Thanks to these children, Carl found a way to get rid of the anger and hatred inside him. And that's how the movie ends. Please show your support by liking and subscribing to my channel. Thanks for watching.